When it comes to avoidant partners, most people think the key to making them come closer is doing less, pulling away, being quiet, matching their distance. But what if the real secret isn't about what you do, but about who you become? Because here's the truth. Avoidants don't chase the people who beg for closeness. They chase the ones who have shifted their energy. It's not silence that makes them turn around. It's the confidence that radiates from someone who no longer needs them to feel whole. This video isn't about tactics or manipulation. It's about understanding the 7 psychological shifts that make an avoidant stop running and start chasing. These are the subtle changes that turn the anxious energy of "please stay" into the calm certainty of "I'll be fine either way." When you make these shifts, you move from seeking reassurance to embodying security, and that shift changes everything. Avoidants don't fear love, they fear losing control. When you take back yours, emotionally, mentally, energetically, they begin to sense it. It's not about power games, it's about alignment. You stop orbiting around them, and suddenly, they're the ones trying to find your gravity again. So let's talk about the first shift, the one that quietly flips the entire dynamic without you saying a single word. Part 2, the energy shift, from needing to choosing. The first real shift happens deep inside you. The moment you stop needing them to choose you and start realizing you have the power to choose them. That might sound small, but energetically it's everything. You see, avoidants are hypersensitive to emotional dependence. They can feel when someone is unconsciously asking, "Do you love me enough to make me feel okay?" And that's exactly the kind of pressure that makes them pull back. But when your energy changes, when you no longer chase their approval, but instead stand in your own sense of worth, something in them wakes up. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's about genuinely reaching a place where you know that love should be mutual, not conditional. You stop performing for closeness. You stop trying to prove your value. You realize that your peace doesn't live inside their validation, and that realization rewires your entire presence. Imagine this. Before, you were standing outside a locked door, waiting for them to open it. Now you've quietly turned around, walked into the sunlight, and started building a life of your own. You're still open to them, but you're no longer waiting at the threshold. That moment, that calm turning away, is what they feel. It's the shift from "I need you to choose me" to "I'm choosing myself." And ironically, that's what makes an avoidant start to chase, because avoidants aren't drawn to desperation. They're drawn to emotional self-sufficiency. When you stop needing them to regulate your emotions, they suddenly sense something new in you. You become safe to love, not because you demand it, but because you no longer depend on it. They feel it in your silence, your tone, your eyes. That quiet certainty that says, "I'm whole either way." That energy is magnetic. It's not about playing hard to get. It's about being hard to shake. You're no longer reacting to their distance. You're simply existing in your groundedness. And that's when the dynamic shifts. They begin to wonder where your emotional energy went. They begin to realize that your attention, once freely given, is now earned through connection, not just presence. And that's the paradox. When you no longer try to pull them closer, they start moving toward you. Because now, you've become what every avoidant secretly craves, someone who feels safe without being dependent, open without being needy, loving without losing themselves. Part 3, the calm power of detachment. The second psychological shift that makes avoidance chase commitment is detachment. Not emotional coldness, but calm clarity. There's a huge difference between being distant and being detached. Distance says, "I don't care." Detachment says, "I care, but I'm not losing myself in it." And that subtle difference is what shakes an avoidant to their core. Avoidants are used to emotional chaos. partners who overpursue, question, demand, and react when they pull away. That chaos reinforces their belief that closeness equals pressure, that intimacy always costs freedom. But when you move into true detachment, the entire script flips. You stop trying to convince them of your worth. You stop explaining your emotions in circles. You stop needing closure every time they go quiet. Instead, you become grounded, peaceful, predictable in your calmness. You no longer chase their silence. You simply stop filling it. And that silence becomes loud for them. Avoidants are often comfortable in distance, but not when the distance doesn't serve their ego anymore. Your calm detachment removes the emotional tether that used to hold them in control. Think of it like this. Before, your emotions danced to their rhythm. When they pulled back, you followed, trying to fix it. Now your rhythm has changed. You're no longer waiting for them to set the beat. You move to your own music. Slow, grounded, unbothered. That shift is powerful because it signals something their nervous system can't ignore. You're not reactive anymore. You've become emotionally self-contained, and that's magnetic. It's the kind of energy that says, I'm no longer playing tug of war with you. And suddenly, they lose control of the dynamic. Avoidants thrive when they know you'll react to their withdrawal. But the moment you stop reacting, not with coldness, but with serene composure, they start to feel something rare, curiosity. They begin to wonder what changed. They replay moments in their mind. The way you used to chase, the way you used to explain yourself. And now, that energy is gone. They can feel the quiet confidence radiating from you, and it draws them in. Because detachment creates a void, and the human mind can't stand a void, especially an avoidant mind that's used to predictability. And here's the paradox. Detachment doesn't make them feel rejected. It makes them feel safe. Why? Because you're showing that love can exist without control. You're proving that connection doesn't have to mean invasion. You're demonstrating what real emotional security looks like. Calm, steady, and free. That's when avoidants start to chase, not because you're withholding love, but because they finally feel free enough to approach it. Detachment tells their nervous system, you're safe to come closer. I won't demand. I won't suffocate. I won't chase. And in that safety, commitment begins to feel possible. Part 4. The shift from words to energy. The third psychological shift that makes avoidants chase commitment isn't about what you say. It's about what you radiate. When dealing with an avoidant partner, words lose power fast. You can say, I love you, I'm not going anywhere, or you can trust me. But to them, those words often sound like noise. Why? Because their entire attachment system was built on broken promises. They've heard words like that before, and the people who said them still left, still disappointed them, still made closeness feel unsafe. That's why your energy speaks louder than anything you could ever say. Avoidants don't trust declarations. They trust patterns. They pay attention to the unspoken, the tone in your voice, the consistency in your actions, the way you hold yourself when things don't go your way. They listen to your silence more than your speeches. So here's the shift. You stop trying to convince them through words, and instead you start embodying what safety feels like. That means calm over chaos, presence over performance, groundedness over explanation. It means you stop saying, I'm fine, while vibrating with frustration. You stop using conversation to fix every distance, and instead let your peaceful consistency prove what words can't. Think of your energy as a frequency, one that their nervous system slowly tunes into. If your energy is anxious, they'll mirror avoidance. If your energy is settled, they'll start to feel something they rarely experience in love, emotional safety. Because deep down, an avoidant doesn't actually fear intimacy. They fear the loss of control and the unpredictable emotional storms that come with it. When your energy is still and steady, it tells them, this connection won't drown you. Let's ground this with a simple example. Imagine they withdraw after an argument. Old you might have sent long texts explaining, apologizing, asking if everything's okay. New you doesn't. You take a deep breath, you go on with your day, maybe you go for a walk, maybe you read a book. And when they reach out hours later, you respond with warmth, not resentment. That single moment rewires something in their brain. You've shown them that space doesn't equal punishment. That silence isn't rejection. That connection can survive without drama. Your energy becomes your message. It says, I'm not going anywhere, but I'm not chasing you either. And that balance is what every avoidant secretly craves. Connection without pressure, closeness without control. Avoidants crave emotional predictability. They want to know that when they step back, you won't collapse. When they return, you won't explode. Your calm presence slowly becomes the proof they need that love doesn't have to be unsafe. And that's when something begins to change inside them. They start to mirror your energy. They begin showing up more consistently. Their messages become warmer, their distance shorter, their tone softer. Not because you forced them, but because you led with energy instead of fear. And this is where you start to realize something powerful. You never needed to talk them into commitment. You just had to create the emotional environment where commitment feels possible. Because avoidants don't chase words. They chase stability. They chase safety. They chase the person whose energy tells them, you're free to be yourself, and I'll still be here. Part 5. When you stop explaining, they start listening. One of the most counterintuitive truths about avoidant partners is this: the more you explain yourself, the less they hear you. Every anxious impulse to justify your feelings, to prove your intentions, to clarify what you really meant, all of that, to them, sounds like emotional noise. You're trying to build understanding. They're hearing pressure. Avoidants aren't wired to decode long emotional speeches. In fact, every extra paragraph, every sentence filled with, I just want you to understand, pushes them deeper into their shell. To you, explaining feels like care. To them, it feels like being cornered. It activates their survival mode. And when that happens, they can't listen. They're not processing your words anymore. They're strategizing their escape. That's why one of the most powerful shifts you can make is silence. Not the cold, punishing kind, but calm, grounded stillness. You stop over-explaining. You stop chasing understanding. You stop turning every emotional moment into a TED Talk. Because the truth is, people don't change when they finally understand you. They change when they feel you, and the avoidant can only feel you when you're not flooding them with words. Think about it. Explaining yourself is often just a disguised attempt to control the narrative. You want them to see you in a certain light, to not misinterpret your intentions, to not pull away. But when you release that need, when you can say less and trust more, something shifts in the dynamic. Your silence becomes power. It's the moment they start to wonder, why isn't she trying to convince me this time? Why does he seem so calm, even though I pulled away? That curiosity, that discomfort, is where change begins. Because for the first time, the avoidant has to sit with their own thoughts instead of reacting to yours. Let's take an example. Imagine you sent a message expressing how you felt, and they respond coldly or not at all. The anxious part of you wants to follow up, to clarify, to soften, to ask if they're mad. But you don't. You leave space. You go about your day. You let your words breathe. Hours later, that silence starts working for you. The avoidant, who once relied on your constant reassurance, now feels the absence of your energy. They start replaying the last conversation. They begin to think, not out of guilt, but out of curiosity. Did I push too far? Did I misread them? That's the beginning of emotional accountability. When you stop explaining, you're not abandoning communication. You're shifting from chasing understanding to inviting awareness. You're showing them, without a single word, that your peace doesn't depend on their reaction. And that's what makes them listen. See, avoidance thrives on predictable patterns. They know the dance. They pull away. You chase. They retreat further. You explain more. Breaking that pattern is like pulling the rug out from under their emotional script. Suddenly, they can't predict you, and that unpredictability draws their focus. The silence isn't a punishment. It's a mirror. It reflects back their behavior, their distance, their fear. And for the first time, they have to confront it without distraction. And here's the paradox. When you stop explaining, they start wondering. When you stop pushing, they start moving. When you stop proving, they start noticing. That's not manipulation. It's magnetism. It's the natural gravitational pull that happens when you step into emotional maturity and stop trying to manage someone else's perception of you. Because confidence doesn't beg to be understood. It lets time reveal the truth. And that's exactly what makes an avoidant start to chase you again. Not because you're withholding love, but because you've stopped making it your job to hold their emotional world together. Part 6, the moment. They realize you've changed the rules. Something powerful happens the moment an avoidant realizes that you're no longer playing the same emotional game. For so long, they've been in control of the rhythm. They withdraw. You reach out. They go cold. You melt. They test distance, and you chase closeness. It's a dance that gives them safety, predictability, and a sense of control over intimacy. But when you finally stop reacting the way you used to, everything inside their nervous system lights up. It's as if the script they've relied on to stay safe has suddenly been rewritten, and they don't know what happens next. See, avoidants thrive on knowing what to expect from you. If they know you'll always explain, always text back, always forgive, they feel comfortable in their emotional avoidance. But the moment that pattern breaks, something shifts from comfort to curiosity, and eventually to fear. Because when you no longer respond with anxiety or anger, when you stop seeking reassurance, they begin to sense that the emotional center of gravity has moved. You're no longer orbiting around them. You've become your own sun. Imagine this moment from their perspective. You used to light up every time they reappeared after going silent for days. They could count on your warmth to welcome them back. But this time, when they text, "Hey," expecting the same old response, they're met with calm simplicity. Maybe just a short reply, maybe a kind but neutral tone. No emotion to feed on, no drama, just stillness. At first, they'll brush it off. They might think you're busy or distracted. But as time goes on, the unease builds. They start to check your stories, wonder what you're doing, or replay conversations in their head. And that's when it hits them. The rules have changed. This realization isn't just cognitive, it's deeply emotional. It triggers the exact fear they've spent their life trying to avoid, the fear of losing control over connection. Avoidants don't fear love itself. They fear being powerless in love. When you were chasing them, they could manage the dynamic. But now that you've stepped out of that pattern, they're forced to confront a reality where you are no longer emotionally available on command. And here's where it gets fascinating. Your silence starts to mirror back their own avoidance. They're now feeling the very uncertainty they used to make you feel. They start overthinking. Did I push too hard? Did I mess this up? Have they moved on? That internal discomfort, the quiet panic beneath the surface, is not punishment. It's awareness. It's the first time they're forced to feel what emotional distance truly costs them. Think of this like emotional gravity shifting. You're no longer the moon orbiting their planet. You've become your own gravitational force. You're steady, grounded, radiating self-assuredness. And they can't help but feel pulled toward that balance. It's not that they suddenly crave intensity. What they crave now is stability, the thing they used to fear most. Here's the irony. When they feel you no longer need their validation, they start wanting your attention more than ever. Because independence is magnetic to someone who spent their whole life equating closeness with danger. Your calm detachment confuses their defense system. It makes them want to re-engage, just to make sense of what changed. But this is also the part where you must hold your ground. Because when the avoidant realizes they're losing control, their first instinct is often to test you. They might send mixed signals, text you affectionately one day, and pull away the next. They're not trying to play games. They're trying to see if your transformation is real. And this is where the true psychological shift lies. The way you respond now determines whether they respect your new boundaries or try to drag you back into the old cycle. If you meet their inconsistency with steadiness, if you continue to prioritize your peace, your self-respect, and your calm, you teach them something their nervous system has never known. Safety doesn't come from control, it comes from trust. That's the quiet moment when the avoidant begins to see you differently. Not as the person who used to chase, explain, and overgive, but as someone who embodies emotional freedom. You've changed the rules not by forcing them to play differently, but by walking away from the game entirely. And when that happens, their world tilts, because for the first time, they're not just afraid of losing your love. They're afraid of losing the version of themselves they could have become with you. Part 7. When their fear of losing you turns into desire, this is the moment the story flips. When the avoidant who once feared closeness begins to fear losing you more than they fear intimacy itself. It's subtle at first. They won't announce it, and they might not even realize what's happening to them. But something inside shifts when they finally sense that your energy, the steady warmth that used to anchor them, is no longer theirs to count on. At the start, they'll try to rationalize it. I'm fine without them. I just need space. They'll reach out eventually. Those are their usual coping lines, a wall built from denial. But deep down, the silence starts echoing differently now. It doesn't feel peaceful anymore. It feels empty. That familiar comfort of knowing you're always emotionally available begins to fade, and the reality of your absence hits like a delayed reaction. This is where desire begins. Not from longing for attention, but from the shock of realizing that your energy was irreplaceable. Avoidants often confuse peace with detachment, but when you truly detach, calmly, silently, and without bitterness, it exposes the emotional void they've been covering up for years. You become the mirror they can't look away from, because through your absence, they see what they've been avoiding, their own fear of connection. Now, when they think of you, it's not about the arguments, the tension, or the overthinking anymore. It's about the stability you brought into their chaos. They remember the softness of being understood, the patience you showed, the emotional safety you tried to build. And it hits differently now that it's gone. They replay moments that once felt too much, and realize those were the very moments that kept them grounded. But here's the thing. Their attraction doesn't grow because you punished them or played hard to get. It grows because you finally embodied something they secretly crave: emotional self-sufficiency. You're no longer reactive, no longer chasing, no longer trying to fix the connection. And that kind of energy, calm, confident, unattached, creates a new kind of gravity. Avoidants are drawn to what feels safe but unattainable. When you stop trying to earn their love, your silence turns into mystery. Your composure becomes a lure. They start to wonder, what's changed in them? Who are they now? And that curiosity turns into attraction, because for the first time, they're not in control. And that unpredictability stirs desire. You might notice them testing the waters again. They'll reach out more often, maybe casually, maybe through nostalgia. Hey, remember that trip we took? Or I saw something that reminded me of you. These are not just words. They're attempts to see if they can still feel close to you without exposing vulnerability. But here's where your strength shines through. You don't rush to fill the silence. You don't over-explain or give them the emotional safety they once took for granted. You stay calm, grounded, and selective with your energy. Because at this stage, what makes them crave you isn't your affection. It's your emotional independence. The avoidant mind starts to reverse engineer desire. Where once they equated closeness with danger, they now equate distance with loss. And loss is something their nervous system doesn't handle well, not when it's real, not when it's permanent. So they start to engage differently. They become more present in conversations. They listen longer, share a bit more. You can feel the tension between their instinct to run and their growing urge to stay. This is also the part where the transformation becomes visible. The same person who once needed space now finds excuses to stay connected. They'll offer help, start showing interest in your day, or even initiate deeper conversations. It's not manipulation. It's a subconscious pull toward what they once feared. But make no mistake, this moment isn't about you winning or proving a point. It's about reclaiming your emotional power, the version of you that stopped chasing, stopped explaining, stopped needing. That is the version that rewires the dynamic completely. Because here's the truth. Avoidants don't fall for people who chase them. They fall for people who make them feel safe enough to come closer on their own terms. When you stop trying to pull them in, you create the space where they can step forward willingly. And that's when their fear of losing you transforms into a deep, almost haunting desire, not for attention, but for reconnection. They start to crave the feeling of emotional safety they once ran from. They begin to wonder what it would be like to finally show up. Not just to you, but to themselves. That's the turning point, the moment their defenses stop protecting them and start isolating them instead. Part 8. The transformation of the avoidant mind. This is where everything changes. Not instantly, not with fireworks, but in the quiet spaces where realization begins to dawn. The avoidant, for perhaps the first time, starts to see that the walls they built to feel safe are the very walls that now keep them lonely. It's not a dramatic breakdown. It's more like a slow, steady awakening. The kind that happens when the noise fades and they finally have to sit with the echo of their own defenses. You see, for so long, the avoidant has equated distance with peace. To them, emotional control was safety, and self-sufficiency was pride. They believed that needing no one made them strong. But after losing someone who truly saw them, someone who gave love without control, someone who walked away with grace, that belief starts to crumble, because now, distance doesn't feel peaceful. It feels hollow. They start noticing the little things first. The quiet doesn't soothe them anymore. The solitude that once felt like protection now feels like punishment. The routines that used to distract them, the gym, the late nights at work, the scrolling through meaningless updates, all begins to lose their power because none of it fills the space that connection used to occupy. This is when the internal dialogue begins. It's not loud or dramatic. It's hauntingly quiet. Thoughts like, maybe they weren't the problem. Maybe I was the one who shut down. Why did I push them away when all they wanted was to understand me? These realizations don't come easy. For an avoidant, acknowledging emotional responsibility feels like walking barefoot over glass. Every step cuts through years of conditioning. Conditioning that told them love equals danger, vulnerability equals weakness, and depending on someone equals loss of control. But here's the paradox. It's precisely when they lose control, when they lose you, that they start to feel what real connection meant. Because your absence didn't punish them, it revealed them. It showed them how disconnected they had become, not just from you, but from their own emotional core. Now something powerful begins to happen. The avoidant starts to experience longing, not for validation, but for emotional truth. That's new for them. For the first time, they don't want to escape the feeling. They want to understand it. They begin to ask themselves deeper questions. What was I so afraid of? Why did love feel like danger when all they offered was patience? And beneath those questions lies the first spark of transformation: emotional self-awareness. This is the point where an avoidant can no longer hide behind intellectual justifications. They start to feel, really feel, the cost of their avoidance. The missed chances, the cold silences, the emotional armor that kept love out. And what's beautiful, almost tragic, is that they begin to see that their pattern wasn't protection. It was exile. They weren't protecting themselves from pain. They were protecting themselves from love. Now, some avoidants, when they reach this stage, will quietly begin their healing journey. They might not reach out right away, but they start to confront the mirror they've been avoiding their entire life. They begin reading about attachment, reflecting on their behavior, maybe even considering therapy. Not because they want to win someone back, but because they can finally see the pattern for what it is. Survival, not sabotage. Others might try to reconnect. Cautiously, indirectly, testing the waters. They won't come back with grand apologies, but through small actions. A message checking in, a random memory, a question that seems simple but carries weight. Do you ever think about us? When that moment comes, you'll feel the difference. Their energy isn't defensive anymore. It's uncertain, open, even vulnerable. They're no longer reaching out to control the narrative. They're reaching out because, for once, they miss being seen. And here's where your role shifts too. You no longer carry the burden of fixing them. You don't need to reopen the wound just to prove your worth. Your calm, grounded presence, the one that learned to love without losing itself, becomes the mirror through which they now heal. You represent something sacred, the possibility of love without fear. This is how transformation unfolds, slowly, quietly, but profoundly. It's the moment when avoidance stops being their identity and starts being something they're ready to outgrow. Because now they know that real safety doesn't come from distance. It comes from trust. It comes from choosing closeness, even when it feels risky. And maybe, just maybe, they begin to see that love isn't a trap. It's a mirror, a teacher, a home they didn't know they were allowed to have. Because at the end of every avoidance journey is this single, humbling truth. What they feared most, vulnerability, was never the threat. It was the path home.